They were practical men. The Apostle Peter, hero of our first reading, insisted he was only a man, a simple man, a fisherman. Though Christ made him a fisher of men, he reverted to his old craft from time to time. His more sophisticated mate Paul continued his earlier trade as a tent maker, even as he embraced his new God-given task of making people into living tabernacles. While Jesus often used agricultural imagery for himself and his work, we know he was a tέκτον, carpenter, builder or artisan like his father. Many priests have been practical men, been physical builders, farmers, tabernacle makers, as much as spiritual ones. Australia's first clergy had to be. Their unenviable task was to lead and serve a Catholic community whose members lacked wealth, education, or prospects, and had as yet established no church infrastructure. Captains of passing French and Portuguese vessels expressed surprise that in the 32 years that they had awaited clergy, the Catholic lay community had still not erected a single chapel. But when Fathers Philip Connolly and John Joseph Terry arrived on the 3rd of May 1820, as the first chaplains appointed by Rome and London, they got straight to work, gathering the Catholics of Sydney and beyond for prayer, sacraments, catechesis, planning and fundraising. They also visited on foot, horseback or ship the various colonies, Parramatta, Norfolk Island and Van Diemen's Land, and wherever there were settlers. They petitioned the governor for a site for a Catholic chapel and were given the garbage dump near the convict barracks and Hyde Park veggie patch. No one ever imagined what a prime site St Mary's would turn out to be. After a year, Father Connolly moved to Tasmania, where he laboured for 14 years among a wicked and perverse generation. He was admired as a man of no small ability and attainments, witty and full of dry humour, of exemplary religious and moral habits. Meanwhile, Father Terry proved to be a popular, energetic, restless and articulate man, a flamboyant public figure and a far-seeing pastor. Never a team player, always in debt, and usually in contest with authority, he had the blarney to charm support from the poor Catholic laity and the establishment Protestants for his many projects, including the building of the first St Mary's. Terry was a hero of Australian Catholicism by the end of what he described as 44 years of incessant labour, very often accompanied by painful anxiety. That labour, as builder, farmer, tabernacle maker and entrepreneur, and the labours of those who followed after him, yielded spiritual fruit aplenty, fruit that would last. From the beginnings of Terry's first chapel on this site, the Mother Church of Australia evolved into one of the great cathedrals of the world, and from this first parish was spawned 1,300 more around Australia, providing pastoral care to millions. From equally unpretentious beginnings in Terry's first school in Parramatta grew a Catholic education system that now teaches around 770,000 primary and secondary school students in more than 1,750 schools, 200,000 state school children through special religious education provided by 6,000 catechists, tens of thousands of preschoolers in church-sponsored early learning centres, and around 50,000 post-schoolers enrolled in our Catholic universities and tertiary colleges. From equally humble beginnings in Parramatta in 1838 and the first St Vincent's Hospital, Sydney in 1857, Catholic healthcare in Australia has grown to providing 10,000 hospital beds and 20,000 aged care places. Meanwhile, our religious congregations, parishes and agencies like Catholic Care, Caritas and St Vincent de Paul engage in countless acts of charity and pastoral care every day. The first priests and religious, lay collaborators and benefactors, and their successors down the decades, established these ministries and the physical infrastructure underpinning them: churches, halls, presbyteries, convents and schools in most Australian towns and suburbs, as well as orphanages, missions, hospitals, aged care, social housing and the rest. It has meant a great deal for individual lives and for the progress of God's kingdom. But it has also been a very significant contribution to nation building. So much of this country's social capital, in institutions and practices, ideals and customs, is patrimony from our forebears. But for them, this country would not be what it is today. We sometimes hear the slogan, "people over buildings," meaning the maintenance and staffing of plant can be burdensome and distract from the mission. It sure can. But as St Mary MacKillop appreciated, you won't raise poor Aboriginal, rural or city kids out of poverty, ignorance or sickness on the streets. They need a school or clinic. What's more, they need a church. As COVID has highlighted, we Christians are ecclesia, a gathering people. And that means we need places for assembly and ministry. Our first pastors knew the importance of building up the people of God, and so of putting in place structures to support and foster their faith, worship and service. They knew that without a vineyard or orchard and the support there provided, we will not bear fruit as Christ exhorted us. Well, as every farmer knows, the planting, pruning, nourishing and harvesting of trees and vines, and the enlargement and improvement of the orchard is never finished. The forthcoming 5th Plenary Council of Australia will be a chance for the Church in Australia to examine the challenges and opportunities, invoke the divine assistance, and apply the natural and spiritual gifts of its people, to renewing and resourcing parishes and ministries with evangelical creativity, to re-evangelising our culture, institutions and individuals, to transmitting the faith, supporting family life and reaching out to the marginal, to worshipping God in ways both worthy and welcoming, and to ensuring access to the sacraments, and thus to promoting, forming and supporting good vocations. No motto better sums up our goal here than that given us by the Lord today: to love as he loved, not just as deeply and comprehensively, but also as actively and fruitfully. Bureaucrats and buildings cannot love you. Only God and people can love you. And so these must come first if love is to come first. Our founding fathers recognised clearly that all the buildings and systems and infrastructure in the world must serve the mission, not vice versa. Whatever challenges we faced in the past, faced now, or will in the future, the work of our first priests and their successors offers our response. That rather than acquiescing in the spirit of the age or our own negative emotions about how hard it is, we must redouble our efforts to be faithful to the commandment to love and breathe the Holy Spirit of quiet and humble confidence. There's a story of St. John the Divine, by then an old man, long retired from care of the Blessed Virgin and from his writings. St. Jerome recounts that this last surviving apostle kept murmuring again and again, "Dear children, love one another." Some feared this indicated dotage, but when one of the disciples asked why he kept saying this, he replied, "Because it is the Lord's commandment. If you keep this one, it will suffice."